If this story touched your heart and you love animals, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In the spring of 2023, the town of Sandrow, Iowa, was drowning in rain. The skies had opened up and refused to close for nearly a week. Water clung to every surface, pooled in every dip in the land, and transformed roads into winding streams. Even the central streets, usually busy with trucks and chatter, now reflected only clouds and the occasional flicker of headlights across their mirrored surfaces. On the outskirts of town, where houses thinned and gave way to overgrown lots and sagging fences, Jenna lived alone in a modest bungalow. A paramedic by trade, she had just returned from a double shift at the county clinic, her body aching in places she hadn't even known could ache. The rain had followed her home, tapping ceaselessly on the hood of her truck, soaking through the cuffs of her scrubs as she climbed out. She was tired, ready for nothing but dry clothes and silence. Usually at this hour, her dog Archie was at the gate, tail wagging in joyful arcs, ready to shepherd her inside with 1,000 eager barks. But today was different. As she stepped into the yard and unlatched the gate, she noticed him pacing, not his usual bounding excitement, but an anxious, restless rhythm. His reddish ears were flattened against his head, and he kept glancing toward the vacant lot that bordered their backyard. The lot, once slated for development, had become a wild tangle of weeds, broken tree limbs, and, after so many days of rain, an accidental marsh. Archie barked, short and sharp, then looked at Jenna as if urging her to follow. He turned again, loping toward the back fence, then returning, circling her like a rope drawing tight. Jenna frowned. Her boots squelched in the mud as she followed him across the sodden yard and around the house. The rain had lightened to a mist, but the air still hung heavy with dampness. As they neared the fence, Jenna heard it, a faint, high-pitched sound, easily mistaken for wind at first. But then it came again, more distinct, a rapid, desperate peeping, nearly drowned by the drip of rain from the eaves. Archie darted to a break in the old wooden boards and slipped through. Jenna climbed over with less grace, catching her breath as she landed in ankle-deep water on the other side. The vacant lot stretched before her like a forgotten basin, puddles merging into each other, grass flattened into dark slicks. Archie was already at the edge of one of the deeper pools, barking with a sense of urgency that made Jenna's stomach clench. She squinted into the murky water, following his gaze. There, half submerged in the muddy shallows, was a duckling. Tiny, soaked, and barely able to keep its head above water, it flailed weakly, the ripples around it fading as its energy dwindled. It must have fallen from a nearby nest or been separated from its mother during the storm. Alone, it had wandered into the water and couldn't find its way out. Archie barked again, louder now, his front paws dancing anxiously on the muddy bank. Jenna dropped to her knees, the cold water seeping instantly through her jeans. She reached for the duckling but hesitated. The mud was slick, the footing treacherous. She needed something, a stick, a scoop, anything. But there was no time to run back. The duckling was slowing, its tiny beak opening and closing without sound. Archie stepped closer, planting his paws just inches from the water, as if willing her to act. Jenna leaned forward, stretching, her arms submerged to the elbow. She brushed the wet fluff, missed, reached again, and finally, her fingers closed around the trembling, fragile body. The duckling didn't resist. It simply collapsed into her palm, spent. Jenna cradled it against her chest and sat back on her heels. Archie nosed her side, sniffing the bundle, then let out a single, low whine. The storm was quieting. Somewhere in the distance, a car splashed along a wet road, but here, in the flooded lot behind her house, it felt like the world had shrunk to the warmth of a palm, the beat of a heart, and the dog who hadn't stopped calling until someone came. The ditch was deeper than it looked. From the top, it seemed like little more than a puddle stretched into a narrow trench. But as Jenna knelt and shone her phone's flashlight into the murky depths, she realized how deceiving the water's surface had been. The rain hadn't just filled the depression. It had transformed it into a slow-moving gutter of runoff, a filthy stream lined with debris, broken twigs, and slick patches of mud that clung to every surface like glue. The duckling was still there, huddled in the shallowest bend of the channel, pressed against a piece of plastic as though trying to make it into a raft. Its feathers were soaked and matted to its tiny body, giving it a strange, flattened appearance. Every few seconds it tried to paddle upward or grip at something with its useless, trembling feet. Then it would slide down again, barely managing to keep its head above water. Archie stood beside her, shivering but unwavering. The rain came and went in bursts now, short spurts of needling drizzle followed by eerie silences. His ears twitched at every splash from below, his eyes fixed, his muscles coiled. Jenna glanced at him and then back down. The flashlight beam flickered in the water, dancing across the duckling's soaked wings. No sticks, no rope, no one around. The lot was abandoned, framed by crumbling fencing and broken signage. Jenna exhaled through her nose and looked around again, desperation sharpening her breath. She pulled off her rain jacket and twisted it into a makeshift rope, hoping to lower it gently enough for the duckling to grab, or at least climb. She dangled it down, careful not to touch the water too hard, trying to guide the fabric into position. The duckling responded. Weakly, it flapped a wing, lifted a foot, tried to clamber onto the fabric. It failed, slipped, tried again. It didn't cry out, but Jenna could see its movement slowing. Water slicked its body with every failure, dragging it down further. Jenna swore softly under her breath. She edged closer to the ditch, the mud squelching beneath her knees. Nearby, a tree had sent out thick roots, gripping the edge of the embankment like fingers. She hooked one leg around the sturdiest root, the bark damp beneath her jeans, and slid forward until she was flat on her stomach. The smell of wet soil rose in her nostrils, cold pressed against her ribs. Stretching one arm forward, she dipped it into the water, the chill biting her skin instantly. She reached for the duckling, her fingers just inches from its bobbing head. It flinched, tried to backpedal, but there was nowhere to go. "Come on," she whispered without speaking, her lips pressed tight in concentration. She lunged that last bit of distance, submerging her entire arm to the elbow. Her hand closed around the trembling bundle. It didn't resist. It barely moved. Jenna held it gently but firmly and began to pull back. The mud sucked at her forearm like a living thing. For a second, she thought she might lose balance, slide forward, fall in herself. But her leg held against the tree root, and Archie's presence, close, solid, steadied her. She dragged herself backward, inch by inch, until her hand, and the duckling cradled within it, broke the surface again. Archie whined, stepping forward, his nose twitching as Jenna curled protectively around the duckling, shielding it from the wind. Its body was like paper in her palm, light, shaking, barely warm. She pressed it close to her chest. For a long moment she didn't move, just breathed. The ditch gurgled beneath her. The rain dripped from leaves and fence posts. Archie sat down, watching the duckling with ears perked and paws muddy. Jenna finally sat up, cradling the duckling against the inside of her shirt, letting her body heat seep through the soaked fabric. The level of the water hadn't dropped. The ditch was still dangerous, but the duckling was no longer part of. Archie barked again, sharp, piercing, cutting through the drizzle and wind like a flare in sound. It wasn't the kind of bark he used for play or strangers or squirrels. It was urgent, rhythmic. A call, not a warning. A voice cast into the quiet in the hope that someone, anyone, would hear it. And someone did. A few houses down, behind a hedge blooming with water-heavy lilacs, Mrs. Hoffman paused. The leash in her hand tugged slightly as her small terrier sniffed the wet grass, but her attention was elsewhere. She'd lived in Sandrow her whole life, and she knew the voices of its animals as much as its people. That bark wasn't random. It was pleading. She turned, squinting through the mist toward Jenna's yard, just visible beyond the vacant lot. What she saw made her gasp. Jenna, sprawled half-submerged at the edge of the ditch, one arm cradling something, and the dog, soaked to the skin, barking with everything he had in him. Mrs. Hoffman didn't hesitate. She turned and began to shuffle back toward her house, faster than she'd moved in months. Her phone didn't always catch signal in the rain, so instead she called out, a wavering but loud "Help!" down the street. A few doors away, Ray had just finished dumping compost when he heard her. He didn't ask questions. He grabbed a long branch from the brush pile out back and ran barefoot across the muddy field, dodging puddles, shirt already sticking to his skin. By the time he arrived, Jenna was sitting upright, cradling the duckling inside her shirt, but her face was pale and strained. She pointed at the edge of the ditch, where sticks and plastic debris had wedged together, forming a dam of sorts. Though the duckling was out, the water was still rising slightly, and another piece of plastic fluttered, threatening to suck under what little ground remained. Ray offered her the branch. She took it, angled it with care, and reached forward. Her first attempt nudged the trash pile but didn't dislodge it. The second push shifted one of the larger pieces, a broken soda bottle, split and curled like a claw. It gave way with a slurp of mud and floated free. The water around the area began to shift, draining more quickly now. What had been a choking puddle around the duckling's feet turned to shallow trickles. The makeshift dam had broken. Archie stopped barking. Instead, he whined, a soft, low sound, as he stepped forward and sniffed at the bundle tucked in Jenna's arms. His nose brushed against a tiny, shivering wing. The duckling stirred weakly. Its eyes fluttered. "Still with us," Jenna murmured, her voice rough from cold and adrenaline. Mrs. Hoffman arrived a minute later, breathless and holding out a thermos of warm tea she'd grabbed on the way. Behind her came another neighbor, a retired school teacher who offered a dry blanket and helped Jenna to her feet. The duckling didn't make a sound, but it no longer looked like it was slipping away. The trembling had slowed. Its head rested against the soft wool of Jenna's flannel. Its feet were tucked close to its body now, not kicking aimlessly in panic. No one tried to take Archie's place beside her. He walked calmly behind as they all headed back toward the houses, his head held low, his gait steady. Jenna didn't need to say a word. He had called, and the world had answered. They returned home as three, Jenna, Archie, and the duckling bundled in a faded kitchen towel. Jenna cleared the table with one hand, cradling the trembling creature in the other. She filled a shallow ceramic bowl with warm water and set it inside an old shoebox, then placed the duckling nearby. It moved instinctively toward the warmth, its damp feathers clinging to its tiny body. Its beak clicked softly, not in distress, but in something closer to relief. Archie lay down beside the box without needing to be asked. His ears twitched at every movement. His nose hovered just above the edge. Every so often, he nudged closer, not to interfere, just to feel the faint warmth of breath, to reassure himself the duckling was still there. Jenna watched him for a long time. She remembered the moment she'd seen him at the shelter 2 years earlier, wide-eyed, too quiet for a spaniel, tail not wagging but gently tapping the floor whenever someone walked by. She hadn't picked him for energy or obedience. She'd picked him because of the way he looked at her, steady and patient, like someone who had learned to wait. Tonight, that look returned. As Jenna knelt beside him, Archie raised his head just enough to meet her gaze. He didn't wag. He didn't move. But in his eyes, she saw what she hadn't before. Not just instinct, but memory, intention. He hadn't just barked because something moved. He had seen the duckling, understood it was helpless, and decided to call until someone came, until someone helped, until he wasn't alone in knowing. The duckling stirred again. Its body still trembled faintly, but it no longer looked like it was folding into itself. Its tiny chest rose and fell in a slow rhythm, too fragile for the wild. but enough for now. Jenna reached out and gently touched its side through the towel. It was warm. Not hot, not cold, just warm. The house was quiet now. Outside, the rain had slowed to a murmur against the windows. The streetlights cast hazy halos through the mist still clinging to the ground. Inside, a single lamp lit the small kitchen with gold. Jenna stayed by the box even after Archie dozed off. She wasn't tired anymore. Or maybe she was, but in a way that felt earned. The duckling's heart was small, but it beat. And sometimes, she thought, it took another small heart to notice, to care, to call loud enough that someone would listen. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the kitchen blinds. The rain had finally stopped, but puddles still mirrored the sky, and the ground held the hush of water-soaked earth. Jenna brewed a cup of coffee she didn't drink. Instead, she sat beside the makeshift nest, watching the duckling stretch its neck and peep softly into the warm stillness of the room. Archie was already awake. He hadn't moved far all night. His eyes tracked the duckling's every shift, not with tension, but with quiet attention, as if committing it to memory. Jenna knelt down and gently picked up the duckling, wrapping it again in the towel. It squirmed for a second, then settled into her hands. She had called the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center early. A woman named Marta had answered. Her voice was calm and efficient, the kind of voice that handled small lives daily. She asked a few questions and then gave directions to a facility 20 miles out, just past the county line. "Bring him in by noon," Marta said. "We'll do our best." Jenna nodded, though no one could see it. While she packed a soft carrier with towels, water, and a note about the night before, Archie stood beside the box, tail low, ears turned slightly back. Jenna glanced at him and hesitated. Then, without a word, she picked up the duckling and placed it gently in front of the dog one last time. The duckling blinked, turned its small head, and stepped forward. It tapped Archie's front paw with its beak. Soft, quick, almost like a question, or maybe a thank you. Archie didn't flinch. His tail gave one slow wag. Then he stepped back and lay down, head resting on his paws, as if understanding something was ending. The ride to the center was quiet. Jenna drove slowly. Archie sat in the back seat, his head near the carrier. The duckling didn't make a sound. At the center, the handoff was smooth. Marta examined the duckling with practiced care, then smiled. "He's stronger than I expected." "Good work," she said. Jenna shook her head. "It wasn't me." She looked at Archie. "He found him. He didn't stop barking until I came." Marta bent down to scratch Archie behind the ear. "Well," she said softly, "that's one good dog." Back in the car, Archie sat quietly. He didn't look out the window. He didn't sniff around the empty carrier. He simply curled up as if something inside him had gently settled. For a single night, they had been a pack. The rescuer, the witness, the saved. A fleeting, accidental family formed not from blood or habit, but from the sheer act of responding. And that was enough. A month later, Jenna received a letter from a volunteer at the Wildlife Rescue Center. It arrived in a plain envelope, the kind usually filled with bills or flyers. But inside was a handwritten note and a photograph. The note was brief, but warm. "The duckling is doing well. He's learned to swim, eats on his own, and, you'll like this, he seems to be drawn to dogs. We decided to name him Archie." Jenna smiled, her thumb brushing the corner of the photo. It showed a small duckling in mid-step, his wings just slightly open, waddling toward a large shepherd mix lying in the grass. The resemblance was a stretch, but the spirit, the soft alertness, the watchfulness, it was unmistakable. That evening, she sat on the front porch long after the sun went down. The sky was still streaked with soft light, and the breeze carried the smell of wet earth and lilacs. Archie lay at her feet, his body warm against the boards, his ears twitching now and then at distant sounds. She ran her hand slowly down his back, feeling the weight and calm of him. He had no idea that his name had been passed on to a creature he had saved. No idea that in the quiet moment when he barked toward the flooded ditch, he had changed the ending of someone else's story. And maybe he didn't need to know. Because Archie didn't bark to be praised. He didn't bark to be a hero. He barked because something small was in trouble, and he heard it. Jenna looked at him and thought of all the moments we miss. The cries we don't hear. The steps we don't take. The lives we never intersect because we're too distracted or too busy or too unsure. But not Archie. Archie listened. And sometimes that's all it takes. A single voice raised not for itself but for another. A single moment when someone stops, looks, acts. Sometimes rescue doesn't begin with a person. Sometimes it begins with a bark.